Hey there, CPO here. Today I'm going to start working on the electronics component of the heli build. I've been looking forward to this part. I'm very interested in how all these components interact. And primarily the reason I want to get this done at this point of the game is because in my frame assembly I still only have basically the bearing mounts for the main bearing, the motor mount. I'm getting ready to install the motor next and the main gear. And I have held off on putting in the servos because I want to have complete access to this motor mount so that I can get that aligned properly without having to fight with servos. But I want to have the servos ready, and so what I need to do is take these guys and get them centered and the servo arm set at 90 degrees. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the gyro for that, because my flybarless system is how I'm going to run these particular servos. So I want to do all of my centering off of this unit. In order to do that, I'm going to need to bind my receiver with my DX6i transmitter. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and bind up my satellite receivers, because actually on this particular build I'm only going to use 2 satellite receivers with this Robird because it can handle dual satellites. Unfortunately, I had to have a full receiver just to bind these guys. Then I have this ESC here that I'm going to use. This is a Hobbywing Platinum Pro 40 amp. It's you know, a very well-known ESC, very reliable. I've gone ahead and soldered the XT60 plug onto the end of it so that I can connect it to my battery, which now I have charged. If you've seen that video, you know I can charge batteries now, which is helpful. And so I'm going to go through kind of the beginner. If you've never done this before, here's what you need to do to set up your receivers. Here's what you need to do to get your transmitter ready for centering. All those things that are available in different parts of the internet and different build forums. I'm just going to take all of this electronic stuff and stick it in one consolidated video because I know I had to go hunt different areas to find out different pieces of information. And when I deal with electronics, I get a little bit nervous. I don't like dealing with electronics. I've blown my fair share of, you know, transistors because I wired something wrong or I programmed it incorrectly. So it's a little nervous, right, to get this stuff done. But I'm going to run through it with you step by step, and hopefully this will be helpful for you as well as helpful for me. So what is not in play right now is the motor. I will deal with that later, but for now I just want to deal with these electronic pieces and get this build running. So bear with me. It may be remedial for some of you. Again, I'm going to start with the basics. How do you get your radio ready to bind to a receiver? What do you have to do with the receiver to bind it with the radio, and so on and so forth. And then I'm going to go through the detailed setup, including the software setup of this Robird flybarless system. So should be a great build, and I look forward to doing it with you. So thanks a bunch, and let's get started. Okay, for the radio, the first thing we're going to want to do is set up a new model. And I'm using the Spectrum DX6i, so this is how this works in that particular radio. I'm sure it'll be easy for you to find instructions on how to do your radio. So basically what I have here, the model I've been using is a SIM model because that's all I have right now that I use this transmitter for, is a SIM. So I'm going to set up a brand new model, and basically I'm going to set it up just for this particular heli. So I'm going to go to model 2, which is blank, and then I'm going to select that. Now that I'm in there, I have some menu options here. The very first thing I need to do is go to Setup List, select the model type. By default, it shows up as an airplane. I'm going to switch that to a heli. And I'm going to change the name right away so I know exactly what I'm, whoops, going to call it. So I'm going to call this Taro 450. It's kind of tedious to get this through, but if you've done it once or twice, it shouldn't be too bad. And we're getting close here. There we go. All right, so my model name is now Taro 450. Convenient, that's the helicopter we're building. So now I want to do is go back to the adjust list. And let's see here. I want to do a couple of things. The most important one is going to be to set up the swash type. And that is actually in the setup list. Swash type. By default, it's a 1 servo 90 degree. We need to change that to a CCPM 120 degree. That's probably the most important step we can do in here. And go back here to adjust list and look at my swash mix. I want to make sure that it's 60, 60, 60, so all three equal mixes, so that's good. Throttle curve is the next thing I want to do. Actually, you know what? That looks like, for now, for the purpose of what I need to do with this particular radio, just to get the servos set up, I want to make sure sub trims are 0, which is good, because I don't want any sub trim on here. Travel adjustment, I want to be 100% for everything. And if I go, if I move the sticks back and forth, I want to make sure that I see those arrows move and it stays 100% regardless of the direction I'm moving the sticks. Okay, so all that is 100%. That's perfect. I think that's really all I'm going to do right now. There are some other settings that I'll want to do once I actually set up the helicopter, but for now, that's basically what I need to do to set up the transmitter to bind with the receiver. And next we will get that receiver out. So this is the receiver I'm using. It's a Spectrum AR6210. It's a DSM-X model. And if you're like me and you've never seen a receiver before, it can be a little bit intimidating to know how to plug everything in. So one of the things I'll share is kind of what I've learned about setting this up. I have the, this is the power from my ESC controller, right? So this is going to go actually in the throttle port here. And the way it works out is, you can kind of see it here between the gear and the aux1. The negative pin is on the outside, the positive pin is in the middle, and then the control pin, I don't know what that's called really, but I'm going to call it the control pin, is on the right side. So that should align with your cables. So black for negative, red for positive, and then the white would be the control. So just to even connect it to the ESC, I'm going to connect it just like that through the throttle. Now interestingly, I'm not going to connect my servos directly to this because I'm going to use the fly-barless system, but servo color coding is different. You see a brown, red, and orange. And so the brown, red, and orange actually coincide with black, red, and white. So if you get to a point where you need to plug a servo directly into a receiver, or for that matter, anything else, we'll probably get to this with the fly barless controller. It's going to go. So let's say that this is my my rudder control servo. It's going to plug in just like that. Brown being the negative, red being the positive, and then yellow or orange, depending on how good your vision is going to be that inside control channel. So that kind of confused me a little bit. I could set up and center all of these, plug them in, and set the centers from the receiver itself, but I'm going to use the fly barless system, so I'm not going to do that. All I'm going to do right now, my big concern, is going to be binding this transmitter and receiver together. So I need to have power to it, which is why I'm plugging it into the ESC through that throttle channel. That'll allow me to power up the system. The other thing I'm going to need to do is use a bind plug. Interestingly enough, I don't have a bind plug. I got this receiver off of one of the forum members who was selling it. It was brand new, but it was part of a package with a radio. So when he sent it to me, I got no instructions and I got no bind plug. Probably for most people, that's not a big deal. Unfortunately, I don't have anything to start with, so everything I'm getting is the first time I'm seeing this stuff ever. So instruction manuals are important, no big deal. I can find those on the internet, went and downloaded it. And then the bind plug is important because I need to bind this. The good news is I'm fairly creative and I like puzzles. So rather than trying to fret over the fact that I don't have a bind plug and actually go spend money to get a bind plug, I just had to understand what the bind plug does and then how to mimic that behavior. So what the bind plug does is actually on this bind channel here, there's an outside and then the inside pin, ignoring the positive pin, the hot pin, but just the black and the white. If you're looking at these wires next to it from the ESC plug-in, it basically creates a short between the outside and the inside pin. And that's how the bind plug works. It tells the system that you want to bind to a transmitter based on that. So what a bind plug essentially is a single wire connected that plugs those two together. So there's plenty of ways to replicate that. One thing you can do is take an old servo cable like this that's designed to plug into there and cut the wires, and then remove the red one or for whatever reason get it out of the way, and then just connect the orange, the yellow, I guess it's orange and brown together to jumper those, and then plug it in and you'll be set to bind. Problem is I don't have a spare servo laying around. All the servos I need or do not want to destroy. So the first time I crash and destroy a servo, I'll build a better bind plug. But for now, I'm just being creative with what I find. So I actually had some parts laying around from an old Roomba robot vacuum cleaner that I managed to disassemble and never get reassembled because I basically abused all the parts to the point where now it's just a parts bin. But in there were some kind of these little plug adapters that I pulled out of something that actually fit really nicely over these pins. They're perfect size for these pins. So all I did is take it and tie the end together. So basically I have a jumper which is going to act as a bind plug. So ignoring the color coding, because the color doesn't matter on this particular operation, I just need to connect the outside pin. Make sure I get that on there. All right, let me hold this up here so I can see it. Okay, so there we go. I have the outside pin and the inside pin jumped, and I'm basically not touching. I'm going to get you very good, good focus. You can kind of see it through there. I'm not touching that that middle pin, and you know, it's kind of ad hoc, but it works for what I need to do. I just need to bind this. So, with that said, I've got my binding plug in, and now the thing doesn't want to lay right. And what I can do now is attach the battery power to my ESC. When you do this connection, you want to make sure that your transmitter is unplugged, because you're going to want to set it into binding mode as well. So it'll be important that it's unplugged. So basically, take my battery, take my ESC, plug them together. You're going to hear a little bit of a static charge, a little bit of a jump, maybe even see a little bit of a spark when you plug the ESC into the battery. If you're new to this, that may be a little bit concerning, but that's normal behavior. Basically what it's doing is it's charging up these capacitors inside the ESC, and a rush of electricity is running in there to do that. So that's what that sound and spark comes from. But we're going to ignore that for now, because what I really want to focus on is this. So when I'm in bind mode, I'm going to get that flashing, rapid flashing orange light that tells me that it's waiting to get bound to a transmitter. Okay, so as you can see, I have the receiver in bind mode. I'm going to hold up the trainer switch and then power on the DX6i. It says bind in here and it's beeping, and I'm waiting for this to go solid. Once it goes solid on the receiver, I can then let go of the bind switch. And now the receiver and the transmitter are bound together on that particular model that I set up. And what you want to do is now remove the bind plug before you turn everything off. And then it will be locked in place and bound to that particular setup there. So with that said, now I can turn off the radio. And when I lose connection with the radio, you see the red flashing light on the receiver. That's indicative of a radio out of range sort of a situation. Something to look for actually when you crash your heli out here is what's the status of the receiver. So I'm going to disconnect power to the receiver, and then I'm just going to validate in my own head, and basically to show you that I do have actual connection with the radio by plugging in a couple of servos. So I'm gonna plug in aileron and pitch. Pitch is going to go into the aux channel generally on this particular receiver, and I'm going to go ahead and plug in elevator. So that'll give me a few different things to play with to show you how now it responds to stick controls. Of course, you can't see anything with these just sitting like this. And it's like stacking dominoes that are connected by cables here. So what I'll do is just for demonstration purposes, I'll throw on some servo horns. We're going to need those here pretty soon anyway. But just to kind of show you now, I'm just playing around a little bit. And it's to confirm that I'm doing things correctly, because I've been known to make mistakes and I want to try and catch them as I can. This guy doesn't want to stand upright. Okay, so I've got 3 servos set up here. The one thing I want to show you though, the reason you have to power on the servos in order to set 0 or set 90, center them and set 90, is they will remain in whatever position you push them when there's no power to them, basically. So what happens is when you power them up, they're going to snap to center, and then we'll be able to take some controls from the transmitter. But it's that snapping to center that you need so that you can center them and set them to 90. So I'm going to plug in the ESC again, And you see right away those guys all went to their center positions. If I turn on the controller, you can see I've got the orange light on the receiver indicating that I've got a bind with the radio. And then you can see just as I move the radio controls around, I'm getting some movements on the servos. So I'm not going to worry about what movements are, what's right and what's not. The other thing I want to show you is these guys are kind of noisy, and this kind of threw me off the first time I powered them on. The digital servos tend to constantly want to try and find center, so they're kind of in their own way robotically bouncing back and forth, really minute changes. You can't see it on the servo arms, but there's a little bit of a vibration and kind of some little clicking, buzzing, humming noises depending on what kind of servo you have. So I did some research. That's completely normal. It did throw me off a little bit. I wasn't expecting it, so I wasn't sure if I had faulty servos, but that is normal. I have learned, so everything's good to go there. If I turn off power to the radio, I go back to a flashing red light on the receiver. The servos are still powered on. I just don't have any control over them anymore. And then if I unplug the ESC, everything is now powered down and the servo arms are free to move. So that's the basics of getting the receiver bound to the transmitter, and then also a demonstration kind of how the servos would plug into the receiver if you were going to directly do that. So next we're going to look at getting the satellite receivers bound so that I can begin using those as well once I build the heli. Okay, so here's what I have going on here. Basically I have the same receiver. I am unplugged from the battery, and I reinstalled my fancy bind plug here that I made. And all I did differently now was attach the satellite receiver to the main receiver with this extraordinarily long cable that came with it. So this is one of two satellites that I'm going to bind. They're both DSM-X satellites. So everything works exactly the same. What I'm going to find is when I plug the battery into the ESC, I now have the bind light blinking on both the main receiver and the satellite receiver. So I'm going to do the same thing with the radio. Hold up the trainer switch, turn on the power, and now I have solid orange bind indicator lights on both satellite and receiver. I can let go, and then I want to pull out the bind plug before I power everything down to lock that in place, and then now I'm free to power everything down. When I turn off the radio, I get the red no signal indicator on the main receiver. I get nothing on the satellite. So the only indication of a problem with the satellite is either the orange light on or off. So I'm going to disconnect the power and plug in the second satellite. Alright, so I have now the receiver, the second satellite, which has a much nicer, shorter cord. This is actually a used satellite receiver. It's the only thing in my whole kit that is actually used with the exception of my battery charger. I bought a lot of stuff from forum members, but all the stuff that I ended up buying was new. Not for lack of trying. I looked for a lot of used items. It's just the things I ended up settling on ended up all being new for some reason, with the exception of this one satellite receiver. Just, I don't know, point of record here. So I'm going to plug back in the ESC to the battery. Again, flashing bind light on both satellite and the main receiver. Holding the trainer port, turning on the power. I get the bind indication. I have solid orange light now on both satellite and receiver. I can let go. They are now bound with that channel, that particular model on the transmitter. I can remove the bind plug, and everything is good to go. Shut down. Again, all lights off on the satellite, and then the flashing red light on the receiver. Once I set up the gyro system, the flybarless system, the Robird G31, I'm just going to be using those satellites because that's what I'm going to set up on the heli. And that'll also confirm for me that they are working properly. So with that said, I'm going to disconnect the power, and then we will move on to the next step in this process.